Have you ever heard about people that see spirits all the time? Or perhaps people that have what are supposed past life memories? We'll discuss how even ancestors trying to make contact with the spirit world or the occult can have an impact on our present day experiences. That and a lot more on this part 1 of 2 installment of Spirit Answers Podcast. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Hey, Alex, thank you for having me. It's definitely a blessing being here with you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. And you have an absolutely incredible story, one that eventually takes you to just a crazy exorcism experience where you were the one being exorcised and getting the demonic out of you. Just an incredible experience there. But before we get to that, I want to get us started with how you got there. And really, for you, a lot of this comes back to your family background and kind of opening up some spiritual doorways there. So, if you could get us started there and how you got to that experience, that exorcism experience, that would be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, this really does start generationally for me. I can talk, I promise. um, and I think it does for a lot of people as well. Maybe they just don't realize it though, or some do realize it and take a lot of pride in that. So some key people in my genealogy. One of them is a great great uncle, maybe a great 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 uncle. And anyways, he founded a society for magicians in Baltimore called the Demons Club, and he was the head demon. And these were stage magicians, but I suspect that there was a lot more going on behind the scenes, as there often is with stage magicians. And eventually he created a society called the Society of Osiris Magicians. And so they had a large network based out of Baltimore, and apparently they were known worldwide. And I don't think that what he was a part of, because we share blood, but I'm not direct lineage from him. But I think his story is a symptom of probably a long line of many generations of occult activity in our family. And on my mom's side, um, her mother, who I never met, she died tragically in a car accident before I was born. But she was a Catholic, but she had a tremendous amount of paranormal activity going on around her all the time. And I I don't know if she was a sensitive, but even though I never met her, my mom always had stories about her, and I really feel like I connected with her on that spiritual level of the paranormal. And then, of course, my mother in her youth did mess with the Ouija board and played games like light as a feather, straight as a board, and would tell me these stories that this actually happened. They actually did levitate each other and things like that.
Wow.
So, yeah. Um, and then on the other side of my family, on my dad's side, there's some Masonic connections there. And my great grandmother was part of the Order of the Eastern Star. And I don't know how deep those roots go. But as I said, I feel like those examples are symptoms, not necessarily the cause, but symptoms of a long history of occult activity in our family. And so my mom was a child of the hippie movement, and she was very much a new ager when my brother and I were born in the early 80s. And my dad wasn't particularly new agey or anything, but I think he just sort of went along with, or didn't mind what my mom was into. And she never really did get as far into new age or occult activities as I did, or as I would as I was in my adulthood. But it was enough to make an impact on me, and it was enough to continue that paranormal activity around us. as children, me and my brother. That had a huge impact on me in the way that I viewed the world, because there was just always something weird going on, something unexplained going on around me and my brother. And, I was an older child before I realized that not everybody had these experiences. I thought that ghosts and spirits and apparitions and disembodied voices and weird dreams and seeing shadow people, those sorts of things were just normal. I thought that everybody had those experiences, and it wasn't until later on that I realized that people didn't have those experiences. And so that really defined my childhood in seeking the answers for what was going on, seeking the answers to what was causing it. What was it? Where did it come from? What did it want with me? Why was it bothering me and my brother? If that makes sense. So I was always a very curious child, and I'm a very curious adult and love to research. So the paranormal really shaped my childhood for sure.
When you were having these paranormal experiences, were your parents aware of what was going on?
Um, I think yes, my mom was, but even though she hardly ever, my dad just didn't. He thought that it was just childhood imagination and stuff.
Right.
Where he didn't. He's had experiences of his own when he was a child, but he just really didn't want to believe that it was really happening, I guess. So, but it was mostly my mom that was around because my dad was working all the time. So she believed me. She never discouraged me or anything, or told me I was making it up, or any of those things that can be very damaging to a child, to not believe them. And but she didn't know what to do about it either. And she had never directly experienced very much paranormal except the Ouija board and her mother's stories. And I think there was one time when she was a child that in her house in Baltimore County that she heard a party going on in the downstairs, and of course went down there and nothing was going on. But her paranormal experiences were not as many as mine, and she didn't know what to do about it. And so the new age way of dealing with it is, well, if it's not hurting anybody, it's probably a lost soul, or maybe you're sensitive. And there were times where she took us to psychic fairs, and there was one time that one of the psychic mediums there had mentioned to her that I had a gift and not to discourage me about that gift. And so, even though she saw that these things really scared me, it wasn't very often that I told her about things that had happened. But she just, as I said, she didn't really know what to do about it. So it was just kind of like, well, it's over now, so we'll
Right.
just move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's really interesting because you at this point you hadn't really gotten into the new age much yourself, isn't that right?
Yeah, I'm talking about all like as a young child. Mhm.
Right, right. And so you're having all these experiences happen to you before you even really get into the new age. Your mom at this point has had more interaction with the new age than you
Mhm.
had, and yet you were having more of these paranormal or spiritual experiences than your mom had even had. And to then get that reinforced with the encounter with a psychic, I think is pretty remarkable. It shows that um it really reinforces what was going on here.
Yeah, it really did. It was I believe now that there are familiar spirits and spirits that do follow a family and are attached to a family. And unless the blood of Christ is bestowed upon that family, that curse is never broken. You know what I mean? So there might be varying interests in the occult and the paranormal and new age with a family member, but I do believe that there's a force that can attach itself to a family and just wait for that opportunity to manifest or to influence one person in particular.
What were some of those experiences that you had then growing up?
Um, well, I had sleep paralysis. I know that that's a big one for a lot of people. Um, but I only remember it exactly what happened the one time, and I, even though my mom was New Age, um, she grew up Methodist, so she still taught us the Lord's Prayer, and so of course I was unable to move and grab any kind of Bible, and I was unable to scream. So I just started reciting the Lord's Prayer in my mind, and it faded away from the top of my head down to the bottom until it had completely gone, but it was for sure like a black mass over me. So I mentioned that because I know a lot of people have sleep paralysis, and there was a time when I was a very young child. I think my mom said I was 2, that I heard angels singing, and she related that to an experience that her little brother had had. He was also sensitive, I believe, and he had heard angels singing when he was a little kid. And there's some, when I was real small, 2, 3 years old, so my mom has had to sort of tell me the things that I had told her. Apparently, there was one time that my deceased grandmother, her mother, had appeared to me in a doorway of light and asked me to come with her, or told me to come with her. And of course, I didn't go. But knowing what I know now about fairy lore and things like that, I definitely make a connection with the spirit world there. I don't think it would have been good at all if I had gone with her. And then things like seeing shadow people. Um, I feel like I could go on for days, but there was one time that really sticks out in my mind, and always did. I think I was about 5 years old, and suddenly I woke up in the middle of the night, and this shadow figure was in my room and started walking towards me, and it bent down on its knee, like on one knee, like when somebody's going to propose, and folded its hands in prayer in front of my bed and bowed its head. And I thought that I was dreaming, so I closed my eyes really tightly and pulled the covers over my head and prayed, make it go away, make it go away. And I looked, and it was still there. And
Wow.
so I said, in my mind, said, "Go away, you don't belong here. I don't want you here. You're scaring me." And it didn't disappear right away. I'm sure if I had asked Jesus for help, it would have disappeared right away. But I didn't know at the time that you could do that. So it got up slowly, and the energy of it was kind of bewildered a little bit, a little confused, like why did I want it to go away? And then it sort of took a few steps back and turned around and disappeared.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an event that really sticks out in my mind because it felt very personal. Even though I know it was a shadow being, um, it felt like it knew me. It felt like I should know it. And that was a really confusing experience that stuck with me through adulthood, and made me more curious, even more eager to find out where are these things coming from. And there were times where I saw a shadow figure out of the corner of my eye, and they just always kind of looked like they were observing, sort of. And as I got older, in my teen years, we moved to a house in South Carolina that was known as the haunted house. The first day on the bus, the kids were like, "Oh, you moved into the haunted house." So, that doesn't help when I was already haunted, as a child. Oh, and before I go there, my brother and I had a lot of shared experiences. And when we were living in Maryland still, there were these three demons. I guess they were demons. We'll call them shadow figures that followed us from house to house, actually. And we called them the farmers, me and my brother. Now, he's only 13 months younger than I am, so we're very close. We were very close then. And we would have the same dream, or what we thought was dreams, or like I would see them with my eyes and my brother would dream about them, or I would dream about them and he would see them. And there were these shadow figures that appeared to be farmers, like, for lack of a better term, as children, that's how we identified them, because even though they were all shadow, we could see they were larger shadow figures. We're not talking about like Slender Man type, but had a bulkier figures, the outline of overalls, the outline of straw hats, and they would file into our rooms. We had separate rooms, and they would file in one after the other and stand next to the bed and wake you up and stare at you. And then if you had a nightmare about them, they did the same thing and they would scare you in your sleep. And these things followed us all the way till we were teenagers, actually, in South Carolina. And there was one night, so at this time I was about 16, I think, and I always slept with my door closed, and I was constantly being disturbed by things at night, and didn't really get good sleep. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself with these paranormal stories, because at this time, my mom and my dad had converted to Christianity. But just briefly, since it has to do with the shadow figures, I had accidentally slept with my door open that night, and my brother had the nightmare, and I saw them. And as soon as we met each other in the hall that morning, we both knew that we had seen them, and we had a discussion about it. And I think that was the last time that we saw them. But so that's definitely a shared experience. And we've had my brother and I have had other shared paranormal experiences, so that I'm fairly certain they weren't psychological in nature or just imagined, because we both saw it at the same time. But going back to childhood, I would hear disembodied voices call my name. It sounded like my mom, but it wasn't my mom calling me. I would look into the mirror and see a shadow figure standing behind me. Stuff like that. And trying to think if anything else really. There's so many ghost stories and paranormal stories that it's hard to name them all. I know a common experience that a lot of people have is feeling like they're being watched in the shower. I know a lot of sensitive children have that same experience, where they're scared to close their eyes when they're in the shower or the bathtub, because it feels like somebody's right there and is going to startle them. That happened quite a bit, where I didn't want to close my eyes. I didn't want to sleep with the light off. It just always felt like something was around.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing up the shared experience, their experiences with your brother, because that is always, some people are always going to ask if this is psychological. And that is a great example of something where I think that you almost have to do more mental gymnastics to believe that this is all psychological when people are having shared experiences than to believe in the spiritual. I think that that's a
Mm-hmm.
really good example of something that lends credence to what you're talking about. And then when you add that to everything else, such as what the psychic had told you,
Mm-hmm.
as far as being sensitive, the family background that you have, where people had experience or had ties to the occult, and then you take it outside of this realm. outside of your story, and you look at several of the other stories out there that you can find all over the internet of people that have had similar experiences to you, and how
Yeah.
people are describing exact same situations as you are right here, and then saying that when you ask these creatures to go in Jesus' name, or you call on Jesus to help you, that these beings go just like that. That tells me that this is something more than just a psychological experience. There is something of a spiritual nature going on here. And again, I think you have to do a lot more just mental gymnastics, overthinking things to really come to any kind of conclusion that is anything other than the spiritual realm.
Yes, because there was one instance that if it were psychological in nature, my brother and I would have had to have the phenomenon known as shared psychosis. And I'm sure that there's a psychologist out there who could debate me on it and say, tell me why that happened. But to me, it makes a lot more sense that what we saw was spiritual in nature. Would you like me to share that story?
Please.
Okay. Well, I think that I was 16 and he was 15, I believe. I might have been 15 and 14, but somewhere in that age range. And we had just returned, me and him and my mother, our mother, from grocery shopping, and we were bringing the groceries in to our haunted house. And without having to, I don't want to try to describe the floor plan and stuff, but we were bringing groceries in from the back door into the kitchen. And to get into the kitchen, you have to go into this part of this hallway that leads to the front door, and rooms that go off on either side, like the dining room on the right and the laundry room and the bathroom on the left. And so we're turning the corner together with these bags in our hands, and suddenly from the right side to the left side of the hallway, so from the dining room going into the laundry room, an apparition walked across the hallway. It was as real as Miriam standing there or walking. And so it was striding, and it looked like it was clutching something to its chest. It was wearing a black cloak, and tall boots, and it was hard to make out anything else because of the cloak, but it had a hood over its head, and the cloak came down to about its knees, and it wasn't walking on the floor, it was walking sort of higher up in the air.
Hmm.
But you could tell it was sort of on the shorter side. My brother and I are pretty tall. I'm 5'10" and he's 6'4", 6'5", so to us it was kind of on the shorter side. I would say maybe 5'5", 5'7", maybe. And it strode across just clear as day, and it wasn't scary or anything. Like I feel like some apparitions intentionally try to scare you. It didn't seem that way. It was just an anomaly, just like we saw something we weren't supposed to see, and it didn't pay any attention to us. It looked like it was going somewhere. It was on a mission. And we looked at each other. I said, "Did you see that?" He said, "I saw that." And then as literally seconds later, as we're standing there, it went back the other way. It went from the laundry room back into the dining room.
Wow. Yeah,
100% for sure. We both saw it.
yeah, that's really really fascinating, because I think, like you said, a lot of times these things will intentionally try to scare you, but in this particular case it seems like it was just there. As we know about the enemy, he tries to cause confusion and chaos. So
Yeah.
seeing something like this, I think, just probably further lended credence to your understanding that yes, there is a spiritual world going on, and perhaps even subconsciously helped you believe in the idea of, like, ghosts and people being trapped and those types of things, because that's
Hmm.
we understand that that's what the enemy's trying to do. He obviously hates us, so do anything he can to hurt us and scare us, but he's also here to attack our mind, and this is a perfect example of that, by just causing confusion as well, with something like this. And we see this a lot with ghost hunters,
Hmm.
investigators, people that are caught in trying to investigate this exact type of phenomena. Sometimes, unfortunately, they get trapped in that for decades. So yeah, absolutely, just incredible. And again, lending further credence to this being much more than psychological.
Right. And deception, because,
Right.
you know, a lot of people who well, not a lot, because I haven't tried to tell my story to a lot of people, but some of the people that I have tried to talk to, they still believe that the devil, the enemy, Satan, Lucifer, however you want to define define it, um, is going to be this scary pitchfork guy, like the Dark Lord from the movie Legend or something. And the Bible tells us that he appears as an angel of light. He is very deceptive in his tactics. So something like what me and my brother experienced, I can tell you what it contributed to was believing in parallel and alternate timelines,
Sure.
and our timelines converging, and there being multiple universes existing simultaneously is really what that event put me on to.
Yeah, yeah, and that's another type of way of thinking that a lot of ghost investigators do believe in. They
Hmm.
believe that a lot of these types of ghost sightings are parallel universe sightings.
Hmm.
So, like you were saying, the deception is just all fitting into that deception, and but also, which the enemy is very good at, giving you just a little bit of satiation in terms of, yes, there is a
Yeah.
spiritual world. There's more to life than just this physical, and all that does is it's like, okay, it's like I want more of this. What's going on? It just leads to you're trying to get to the end of this, and
Right.
as you and I know, unfortunately, you never do until you find the truth.
Yep. Absolutely. The
Oh, go ahead.
questions you find answered or just leads to more questions.
Exactly. Yeah, it never ends. You had
It does.
mentioned you had mentioned previously your parents ended up becoming Christians, and I'm not sure exactly how that ties into eventually. You have an incredible encounter, which I would like to have you share here as well, which is um, that experience where you had heard whispered into your ear. I think it was that's enough. And so at
Hmm.
this point, are we kind of there in the timeline as it relates to your also
Yes.
kind of confessing your life to Jesus as well?
This is what happened. So my mother, I hope she doesn't mind me sharing. I don't think she would. She will be listening to this. But she had, as I said, she had been involved with the New Age, but there was somebody she knew from work who had been trying to minister to her, and she had gotten herself a dark attachment, I believe, or there was something that was tormenting her. And she had turned to this man for help, and he said, of course, well, if you want help, Jesus is the only one that can help you, and you have to confess your sins and repent and give your life to him if you want this to stop. And that's when the truth really broke through for her. And she did that. And my father followed suit. And so we started going to a local community church. I was 9 years old at this time. And I don't remember giving my life to Christ like in church, but I know that a youth pastor told me how to say the sinner's prayer. Um, but I can tell you, I did not know what I was asking for. I didn't understand sin. I didn't understand the gospel. I didn't understand what Jesus had come to do for us or anything like that. This I just was thinking of it, well, this is what they said I should do. And I did love God. I mean, I'll be honest, I feel that I have always had a relationship with the Lord. I think a lot of us would say that despite whatever sin we were involved in, God was always there with us and trying to lead us into the right direction until we finally did give our lives to Christ. And there was always someone that I was talking to when I was a child, and I believe that it was God, in my private thoughts and prayers, even though I didn't really know who I was praying to. Um, So I felt like I already had a relationship with God, and that asking Jesus to come into my heart was just the next logical step, because that's what the adults told me that I should do, but I didn't know what I was doing. So when I was 9 years old, I had come home from church that day, and there was a swing set in our backyard. And it was just a nice, warm afternoon. So I was out there swinging by myself and just saying over and over again, Jesus, come into my heart. Jesus, come into my heart. Jesus, come into my heart. And I heard and it's difficult to describe, but I'm sure people who have had this similar experience know what I mean. It wasn't audible in my ear, but it wasn't like my own voice in my head, but it was in my head, but it was also audible in my ear. Um, and the voice just very directly said, "That's enough," just like that.
Wow. Wow.
Very stern, maybe a little bit, a little irritated sounding. But what's really sad is I thought that was the voice of God, and it wasn't.
Mm.
And that moment started a journey of me thinking that I was a Christian, believing that I was, trying to be a good Christian, reading my Bible, but always feeling like God was mad at me about something, always. The spirit of condemnation was palpable. Um, I was always begging for forgiveness. I never felt like I was accepted by God or treasured by Him or even loved by Him, really. That voice I think as a teenager, I didn't think back on that experience and think, oh, God's voice is mean or anything. It was more subconsciously like it was just another defining paranormal moment that caused confusion in me as to God's character
Mhm.
and who He is and who Jesus is and my relationship with Him and what that should look like, what that could be like. So instead of asking Christ into my heart as a 9-year-old and being filled with God's love and God's peace and His mercy and understanding His grace, um, I felt a heavy weight of condemnation from that day forward, that
Mhm.
I was never going to be able to please Him. I was never going to be good enough. I was always going to sin and be doing something wrong to make God mad at me. That makes sense. That stayed with me for a very long time.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important because I think unfortunately there's a lot of people out there that either are not Christian and view Christianity that way or call
Mhm.
themselves Christian and that is their type of relationship with God. And
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to fall into that or to think that that is the routine life for a Christian. And it's no wonder then because I think I understand like this would not really prevent you from kind of getting more into some of these alternate spiritual practices throughout your teen years and into your adult years. And it's no wonder to me because when you're going through when you have that kind of condemning like feeling all the time in that relationship, that's how your relationship with God is defined by that feeling all the
Mhm.
time. You're never enough. You feel like somebody is always like looking down on you and criticizing you and really there's no love there. It's no wonder that these other types of spiritualities with all the wonder and the just the sense of there's something alluring that the seductiveness of those other spiritualities. I think that it becomes even more heightened when you're going through that.
Absolutely. Because you can't live your whole life like that either. And eventually, you'll start looking for the place where you are accepted and where you don't feel condemned, you know?
Right. Right.
And a lot of times that leads people who come from Christian upbringings into alternative spirituality, even though um, theologically we should be able to say, well, these things, alternative spirituality, aka New Age, or the occult or witchcraft, that's not conducive to a Christian life. Like, if you don't have that love for Christ in you, that can only come by the Holy Spirit, being filled with the Holy Spirit, and having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, then there really isn't anything stopping you, so to speak, or red flags, or that uncomfortable feeling you get when you're being convicted of sin, because the Holy Spirit convicts, the enemy condemns.
What happens next in your story is kind of getting more into
Mhm.
these different new age practices, and I believe at this point you start to I can't remember if you already had kids or if you started to have kids, but at this point, from what I understand, you're getting more into these new age practices, and your kids are starting to kind of overlap with this as well, like in terms of what they're telling you.
Yeah. Um, so that is jumping ahead into my early 20s. So during that period of time between 9 and my early 20s, I had tried really hard to be a good Christian, but I just didn't even know what that meant. I really need to take more time to sort of think that out, because I honestly believe that that is the situation that a lot of people find themselves in, that they're like, yeah, I want to follow Christ, and they say the sinner's prayer, but then what? Then what after that? So a lot of, even though we were going to church, the youth group that I was a part of was very toxic, and the friends, so-called, the quote unquote friends that I had in church were terrible to me. Um, and I mention this because this is all leading up to a throw my hands in the air sort of moment, like I give up on Christianity sort of thing. Um, so, the people who were supposed to be Christians, the other kids, of course, they were kids, so that's how kids are, but they were pretty terrible to me. And I noticed that the people who were nice to me were not in my church. They were people of other faiths. They were Buddhists, or they, were secular completely. Their parents weren't of faith, and they were the people who were nicest to me at school. And whereas my supposedly Christian friends who come from Christian families, who were in my youth group who I went to school with, the girl who was supposed to be my best friend would pretend she didn't even know me at school.
Wow.
And so for a sensitive person like me, who's very relationship oriented, and very guarded, um, as far as who I let into my heart, kind of thing, that was very devastating. So we did eventually move to South Carolina, and make sure I'm not forgetting anything important. So I met my husband when I was 14, and we he also came from a similar upbringing where you go to church and you say you're a Christian, but there's no real power of the Holy Spirit there. There's not any, you go to church on Sunday and then live like a heathen the other 6 days. You know what I mean? Like that
Right.
sort of civic Christianity that is pervasive in America. So I became pregnant when I was 20 years old, and I was really upset with God, even though looking back, I made these decisions. I do believe that he was the man that was chosen for me, but we did it all wrong. We did it outside of God's prescribed plan for his children. And he came from a very tumultuous upbringing, and had a lot of emotional handicaps from that and stuff that as teenagers we weren't equipped to deal with. So he had caused a lot of damage to me along the way. And by the time we had kids, when I had our oldest son when I was a week past my 21st birthday, and my husband was about to be 24. We're just kids ourselves, at that point. And I was angry with God. I was angry that my husband um, was not very good to me, that we had all these issues, and angry with God that I have this baby now that we can't financially take care of. So I was angry. I did what a lot of people do, and that is they become angry with God because of their choices that they made in sin. I mean, there's a reason that God wants to protect us from sin, because it hurts us ultimately.
Right.
And so, but I was angry with God regardless, and that nudged me. And during this course of time, my interest in the paranormal and weird things and the unexplained and the supernatural never waned. It was always a very strong force in my life. I still had plenty of supernatural paranormal experiences. And on top of that, I never got good theology. I never, as I was telling you before we started the recording, that I couldn't have told you, I couldn't have explained to somebody what the gospel was. I couldn't have explained to somebody what Jesus actually did for us, what his presence in our lives is supposed to mean. Um, so even though I called myself a Christian and I did read the Bible, it's like almost like I had one foot in Christianity and one foot in the occult, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
that whole period of time, as a teenager, and I read the Bible not to grow closer to the Lord, not to learn more about God, but to find answers to my questions. Like I said, I'm a curious person. I'm very much Eve in the garden, and all I have to do is this to have knowledge to find the answer to this question. Then I'll do that. I was willing to sin to find the answers to these questions that I had. Um, that's my number one vice is knowledge and curiosity about this awesome universe that God created for us, but we're not meant to know everything, and that's for our protection. But anyway, so that was after we started having kids. That just introduces a whole lot more hardship into somebody's life, especially if they're not. The relationship was rocky because we never had a good foundation. Um, we were poor. Um, my husband hadn't even graduated college yet, and I dropped out of college, so we didn't have real jobs. Um, he was working retail and going to college, and we had like $100 a week or something for diapers and food and all that kind of stuff. So there was all this hardship and stress, and I was angry at God, like I said, angry about this relationship. So when our kids were little, and they're about 2 years apart each, and this really started with our daughter. So I would have been in my mid-20s when this started happening, and I was really giving up on Christianity. I had been introduced to Eastern spirituality from a couple of friends, and even though they weren't good examples at all of how to live, I was very taken by just the way they thought about things, the way they saw life, and we had really interesting philosophical discussions, and there was acceptance there. Everybody was just allowed to be who they were, whereas in church, I always felt that I had to be somebody who I wasn't. um, to be there, to get along. And I felt that about most church people that I met, um, that they were pretending. And so when I had these couple of friends introduce me to New Age thought and Eastern spirituality, it really lit up something inside of me. And I started to move away from Christianity and really start to, and I deliberated on it. I thought about it all the time, that maybe Christianity is not the truth because it's not working for me. I didn't apply it the way God intended, but in my mind, I thought I had tried to be a good Christian. I had read the Bible, I had gone to church, and my life was just a mess. And I had said to myself, Christianity is not working for me. So why keep trying to fight it? Why not just explore these other avenues that are very interesting and exciting to me, that seem more real and seem more likely to be true than Christianity is? Of course, I just want to say that, I wasn't doing Christianity the way that God intended, and I hadn't done everything that I could have. And I had all of these questions that I used as an excuse to move away from Christianity, when if I had to set up a meeting with a pastor or a Bible scholar, could have easily been addressed. But as is the case with myself and numerous people that I've talked to, people like to use those lingering questions that they have and doubts about the Bible's authenticity and inerrancy. The list goes on to say, well, this couldn't be true, and to then continue living in a sinful lifestyle. A lot of people do that rather than press in and talk to experts and ask these questions of people who really know them. Or maybe they do go to their pastor and their pastor can't answer the question for them, but we have the internet these days. Everybody has access to these deep theological questions and answers to them. So when our kids were, just to say that I was moving in that direction of Eastern spiritual thought. And our daughter was about, how old was she? I guess our daughter was about 4. And she said something like, remember when I took care of grandma when she was a baby? And I was like, excuse me? And actually there was a time where our oldest son was 2, and I didn't remember this for a long time later because I didn't think anything of it at the time. But he was about 2 years old, and he said, my daddy's dead. And I'm like, no, no, honey, your daddy is just waiting for us at the house. He's not dead. And he said, just deadpan, just completely seriously. He's not joking. He didn't just watch a scary movie. Nothing. He just says, my daddy's dead. And then that was it. And then I didn't know, I didn't think much of it because kids say things. So it wasn't until after I had researched a lot of so-called reincarnation stories of children and past life regression and stuff like that, that I thought, well, that was pretty weird that he said that. And then so my daughter started saying this stuff about taking care of grandma when she was a baby. And I asked my mom, did you ever have a nanny or anything, or a maid or anybody else that took care of you besides your mother? And she didn't have anybody except maybe a housemaid, but she was not a baby at the time, I don't think. So it was just an anomaly. It was just weird, but it got me really wondering what's going on. And then she was 5 years old, and she had an experience Now, mind you, my children by this time had started having paranormal experiences too. I mean, I had always prayed, that God would not allow them to go through the things that I had gone through because it was very scary. I didn't want them to be scared. So, um, that was another thing that made me mad at God, honestly, when they started having paranormal experiences. And I was like, you're not even protecting my kids from this stuff. So I was frustrated about that. So they had seen some interesting and frightening apparitions. So I was getting the kids ready for bed one night, and like I said, she was 5 years old, and she had already gotten in bed and was waiting for me to come tuck her in. And I hear her like getting upset back there, so I run into her room, and her eyes are as wide as saucers, and she's trying to quickly explain to me what just happened. She's like, had this gun and it looked like this, and she's making all these hand gestures, um her arms and her hands, and trying to describe to me. And she's like, had this long point on the end of it, and I was wearing an army man uniform, and the villagers were mad at me, and they said that I took their last food, but then when I explained to them the situation, they gave me their last food, their last corn or something like that, is what she said. Um and I was like, honey, what are you actually talking about? Like, you haven't even been asleep. She hadn't even been asleep yet. So this was like a vision that she had. And, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are open to spiritual experiences and understand these things do happen. But just, for anybody who's skeptical because it was a child, as a parent, you can really tell when your child is making something up compared to when they've really experienced something. Like, if you know your child well, and I had been, always with my kids. I didn't start working outside of the home until our youngest was 9 months old. So I had been with them all the time. I knew them. I knew my children very well, and I knew something had happened. She had really seen something, and that's when I really started um, wondering. Of course, I had seen these TV shows about past life experiences of kids and stuff, and I'm like, that must be. I couldn't get my head around it because of my sort of Christian upbringing.
Yeah.
I didn't want to believe that. Had never thought about reincarnation seriously before, um and didn't believe in it, and didn't even know what past life regression was really. um but that's what led me to Dr. Ian Stevenson's work, um, and reading a lot about past life memories. And it led me to books like Life Between Lives and um, Many Lives, Many Masters, and things like that. They're like the gateway drug of reincarnation study. And but that wasn't the end of it. Not long after that, our youngest, when he was 4 years old or so, he was in K4. He was speech delayed. We even had him tested at school for any kind of cognitive disabilities or anything that he may have had, but he tested completely normal. But he was speech delayed till he was about 3. He didn't even put 2 words together. And I mean, he didn't talk. He didn't talk until he was about 3. And then that was just like two and 3 word sentences. So by the time that he went to K4, and that's kindergarten for little kids, um, he wouldn't even speak to his teacher the entire year. Didn't talk to her, and said very little to anybody but me. And he started saying things like, "Where's my locket? Where's my locket, mommy?" And I'm asking him, "What locket, honey?" "My locket on the barn, on the barn floor." And he starts saying about his other daddy, and that he was in the house. Now this is a 4-year-old, and I'm trying to summarize what my 4-year-old said in 4-year-old speak. So this is not verbatim what he said, but he had explained to me that he was a baby inside of a log cabin home that was on fire, and he explained to me how the papers on the wall ripped in half, and that the doors were all locked, and his dad was running around outside of the log cabin saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I'm sorry." And this is a kid that doesn't talk, mind you, which is why this experience was so made such an impact on me. And he talked about how then he popped out, and then he could see over top of the roof of the house and see his dad running around trying to get in the house, but it was too late, he couldn't save him. And that then there was a new house built next door, and that his dad lived there, but that there was a locket that his mother gave him, and he was just obsessed with this locket and finding it. And he kept telling me it was in the barn on the floor, on the ground in the barn. And I said, "Well, honey, can you draw me a picture?" And he drew me a picture of this locket. And this is not a child that makes stuff up. He still to this day is very literal. Not to say he doesn't have an imagination or he's not creative, but he's not a child that ever really played fantasy games or role playing or anything like that. He didn't really ever pretend to be um heroes, superheroes, or stuff like that. He always just played by himself a lot in nature, and was very content to just play by himself, and never really made up stories or anything. And like I said, to this day, he's still the same way. He's 13 now. He's a very literal child. Like if you say something sarcastic to him, he may think that you're being serious because he just takes things literally. So I knew as his mother that this was a big deal. He really believed what he was experiencing. He was having dreams all the time about this other family. He told me about them. He said they used to catch animals in cages, and hunted animals. And we don't. We're not hunters. We have pets, and he would say things like the animals hate us because we hunt them. And I mean, you can probably imagine how staggering this was to me, all this information. I mean, and it just rolled out of him. He didn't have to think about it. He didn't have to. I didn't have to really pull it out of him. It just came out, and that went on for about 6 months. During that or so, I would say, excuse me. And during that period of time, he also saw an apparition in our home, and he was going to K4, like I said, half a day in the morning, and then my mom was on the days that I worked, she was taking him to school and picking him up because he was only at school for a few hours. And she called me one day and said, "Nolan told me that he saw an old man, and this old man approached him and asked him how to get to heaven." And she was worried about it, of course. And so I asked him, what did he see? And he said that an old man with no shirt on approached him in the house, just here in the living room, and asked him how to get to heaven. And he told him he didn't know. And the man went away. And so several days later, of course, I'm worried that there's something around the house again, because this is not the first time that's happened. And I'm in my bathroom, and there's one of those big sort of generic mirrors that go over like a double sink. So it's a pretty big mirror. And the double doors in the bathroom, you can see all the way into the bedroom behind you when you're looking into the mirror. And I'm like washing my hands in the sink or something, and I look up in the mirror and I see the old man standing behind my bed.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is when I really started to think my son is sensitive to, and he can see things, and he can talk to these things. And that he also told me he saw a shadow man in his classroom during school that was angry with him for being alive. And he said nobody else could see it. And he also said something like, he sees all the people going into the sky, and he says, guys, they're going up, mommy, they're going up, all the people going up into the sky. I didn't really know what he was talking about, but at this point, I just think my child is a psychic medium or something, and he's remembering these past life experiences, and I'm reading all this literature and all these really, they're not scientific studies, but they are pretty compelling studies about reincarnation and proof of reincarnation from around the world and everything. At this point, I'm convinced that's what's going on. Because I didn't have any other reference point for it. I didn't have any other explanation. And I really didn't feel like the Bible had my answer. I wasn't even really thinking about it from a Christian perspective anymore. I wrestled with it a lot because of my Christian upbringing, but at the end of the day, I just threw my hands up and said, this must be what's going on.
Right.
So
Go
that
ahead.
was the very long version of that answer. I'm sorry if that was too much.
No, that was great. I really appreciate you sharing all that information. And I think it's just worth, again, for people that might be hearing that, they're like, oh, I can't believe that, because I would have been in the exact situation that you were in. I would have believed the same thing, that this shows that reincarnation is valid and that Christianity is not real. And I think just taking a step back and looking at everything from a broad perspective is important here, because you had already had a really bad relationship with Christianity. You were becoming friends with people that were more understanding of you and more accepting of you, and treated you well, and had these deep philosophical conversations with them, and that believed in alternate spiritualities, new age beliefs. You have all these different paranormal things going around you, and coming through your kids by way of what they're saying, and also just apparitions that they're seeing. And it's very easy to, based off of what you're seeing, start to think that you're right. There is something here as it relates to reincarnation. There probably is a difference between the demonic and just ghosts that are passing on, spirits that are passing on to the other side. Your son is talking about seeing spirits rise up to the sky, and having somebody ask him about how to get to heaven. And so it becomes very, very easy, kind of like we were talking about before, for this deception to kind of slowly creep its way in. And when you see that, many Christians haven't even taken the time that you've already taken to explore some of these different beliefs and have all these different experiences. Many Christians just outright dismiss them as they can't even be real. It's very easy to understand how you would start to look for answers in other places.
Yeah. It's like ultimately I felt like that was my only choice. That was the only way I was going to find out what had been happening to me as a child, what was happening to my kids. Because as a parent, you want it, it didn't seem at all harmful, but you want to know how to be there for your kids and how to help them.
Right.
And I felt like I needed to find out what was going on so that I could help them, especially if this continued on, or they were having nightmares, or I just really believed that they must have been remembering this for some reason, uh, which leads to a foundational belief that would be paramount to my transition into becoming a past life regression hypnotist. And so that was a little while on yet. So I was definitely studying other things besides Christianity for a while before I found Dolores Cannon. So before I get into quantum healing hypnosis technique, QHHT, and how that all happened, I was just looking at my notes. I made a few little notes over the week, and it wasn't just my kids' experiences. Actually, it was my own past life experiences, or what I didn't. I had no context for them, so I didn't label them as such. But later on, I started to think that that must have been what they were. For example, my earliest memory is something that never happened and could have never happened. My earliest memory is being a little girl with another little girl who must have been my sister, or, I just imagined that she was my sister, playing in around this log cabin home. And my mother, we have a mother, and she's in there and she's making cookies in an old timey oven. And it's very much a log cabin, like the walls are logs, and it's just a very simple little home. And what sticks out to me the most is that the kitchen window had those early 20th century cafe curtains with little printed strawberries on them. And I remember me and this other little girl playing on a stump, like where a tree had been cut down. It was all wooded around this cabin, and there was just like this a little clearing with a stump, and she and I are playing on this stump, and the filtered light from the sun is coming through the trees, and I'm just so happy. And that's my earliest memory. And I've had that dream so often when I was a little girl, that it wasn't until I was older that I realized it was such a part of me that it finally dawned on me one day, that never happened. That's not my life.
Wow.
And yeah, and things like that. And there are some other memories too that weren't really memories. They were either things that I dreamt or something. I don't know, but it was just like they were just built into me. They were just part of me. And I remembered them like they were part of my life, but they couldn't have been. And like I said, it wasn't until I was much older, in my 20s, and even into my late 20s, even after I had started into all this reincarnation and past life regression stuff, that I realized, wait a minute, I never experienced that. It couldn't possibly have been my life. And that's hard to describe, but that's the only way I can describe it, is that it's just always been with me. Those memories have just always been there. And so that all that did was serve to reinforce, of course, that this notion of reincarnation. Um, so with a combination of with my kids, and then, you know, realizing that I've always had these memories too that couldn't possibly be my memories. And so we'll skip ahead a little bit. I was studying, and there are a lot of people who New Age is even more popular now than it was even in my mid 20s, 10 to 15 years ago. It's so much more mainstream now. Everybody's doing yoga, right? Everybody has crystals. Everybody's doing tarot, and it's just like normal. It's seen more mainstream now than even it was then. Um, and there are a lot of people that they don't really study into it, but that's my personality, is to study and to research. So during this period of time where my kids are having these past life memories, I'm confiding in my mom, like, my doubts about Christianity, and about, I think reincarnation is real and stuff, and she's the only person I'm really telling about that. And I'm studying and I'm reading books and I'm learning about, like, hermetics and the mystery schools, and I want to know about the history of these Eastern schools of thought, and um, what these secret societies believed. And I'm looking at, what the Rosicrucians believe, and um, these mystical um, societies and such throughout history. What did they believe? And so it's very much, I hadn't yet completely abandoned what I call my Christianity. I mean, like I said, was not, I could not have gone this far actually being um, true believer of Jesus Christ, but I had knowledge, calling myself a Christian, thinking I was a Christian, and but going away from that and going into these studies. And to me, I was just researching and I was just studying, and I wasn't trying to practice. But there did come a time where I really just said to myself, this was after something had happened with me and my husband that was very difficult and painful, and pretty much just shattered my entire world. And I was so angry at God that I pretty much said, F you, God, I'm going to do my own thing now because you don't care, obviously. You don't care about me if you're even real at all. So that's when I started going into, um, like, for example, I got a book from the public library about Tibetan magic, and I actually did the spells and stuff, which is really foolish. Things did happen. They certainly did. Terrifying things. Um, that I needed outside help to stop, and they eventually did stop. But that did not stop me from pursuing occult practices and magic, witchcraft.
Real quick, and I don't mean
Yeah,
to interrupt you. Did you
um,
also, like, with those, like, the negative effects happening, did you have, quote, like, positive effects as well from the magic that you thought that the magic helped bring about?
I during this time, not directly related to ritual or anything,
Mhm.
or ceremony, but the experience of opening my mind. It felt very much like you will hear a lot of people talk about awakening experiences, which I had several of throughout my life.
Hmm.
Um, the first one being when I saw the movie Contact when I was 11, and I found out later that that's a big one for a lot of people who end up in New Age. It acts as a sort of trigger. Um, and I had some other awakening experiences throughout my life where it just feels like your mind lights up, like you were asleep and now you're awake. And so while there were negative things happening or just really weird things, some people wouldn't consider them negative, but it was scary. Like after the Tibetan magic ceremony and ceremonies I was doing to try to manifest things, I was being woken up every night by spirits. Every night. One of them stood at my bed and said to me, I was alive and then I was in a coffin. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, they're literally, I can hear them talking to me and I can feel them in the room with me. They're waking me up. They're not letting me sleep. I'm terrified. So some people might, there are a lot of psychic mediums who will tell you, and shamans where, well, yeah, when you start waking up to your abilities, that kind of stuff happens, and don't be afraid of it and stuff. But I mean, I'm just gonna tell you, it's scary, even though I had experienced paranormal my whole life, it was still scary because I felt like these things were just coming to me for help or to bother me, and I didn't know why, and I felt like I couldn't help them and stuff. So I mean, that eventually stopped, and that was, I would consider, a negative experience, because I didn't sleep for like a month. But what was positive, and the reason I kept on that path even though crazy things were happening, is that feel of awakening. um, it's that feeling of your mind sort of um, illuminating and expanding. Whereas before, trying to fit myself into a Christian box felt very confining and felt restrictive and felt prescribed and pre-planned for me. And this new way of thought, there were all these options and possibilities that I had never even considered exploring before that were open to me now. So that was the positive aspect of it that kept me going on this path,
And I'm
if that
sure,
makes
yeah, it makes sense. I'm sure for somebody that who really was always on the search for knowledge, I'm sure that that was very alluring to have that feeling of awakening and feeling like you're constantly expanding and combined like with that with just like the sense of wonder that even if you were having some negative effects, just the fact that you were still getting that sense of wonder from the spiritual, and the spiritual was interacting with you. I'm sure that
Yeah,
was very alluring.
right. Exactly. And I know a lot of people have this experience with on a shamanic journey, as they call it, or Kundalini awakening. There are plenty of people um that have terrifying experiences during their Kundalini awakening, is what they call it. But it doesn't deter them, and you have people making videos and putting them on YouTube saying, you know, even though you feel like you're being possessed by demons and all this darkness is around you, just push through it because the light is on the other side of it. And that's very, very common to hear from New Agers and from gurus, about these awakening experiences and expanding experiences. So, when I was looking for help, even though these were scary things that were happening, I didn't categorize them as, well, maybe I should not do it then, or maybe this is bad or wrong or unhealthy. Exactly what you said. Like, I was having interaction with the spirit world, and that was exciting enough to keep me going on that path.
And so did
Um,
oh, go ahead.
no, no, you're fine. I was just gonna think of
Uh,
my next thought.
yeah, no, yeah. You can present that next thought certainly. And I was going to ask if this tied into that, kind of delving a little bit more into the hypnosis. So feel free to finish your thought and feel free to answer me as well on that one.
um, yeah, I don't want to fill up the dead air with as I'm just trying to think of like
No,
what
you're fine.
the next important milestone, I guess you could say, was with that. So as I said, I was studying, researching, and there always was in the back of my mind, like feeling like God was looking over my shoulder and going, "Are you sure you should be doing that?" But I chalked it up to my programming. Like, you will hear that a lot from New Agers and from people in the occult. Your Christian programming, your religious programming, like, it dominates your thoughts. And so I thought that that's just all that was. I didn't think it was really God, like, trying to warn me or stop me or anything like that, because I felt like if he was there and he wanted me to stop, that he would make something happen, like, big, to stop me, and that never happened. And my husband didn't stop me. He was not the spiritual leader of our home at all. I was doing whatever I wanted, and it felt good for a change to do what I wanted, to do something that I wanted to do, to explore something I really wanted to explore. Um, I felt like I was free, I finally felt free. And so all of this is kind of going on. I have started meditating. I had been urged by what I would call, I'm just gonna call it spirit. At this time I didn't believe in spirit guides. I was still skeptical about that. So I was calling it like spirit or the universe, some kind of guiding force. I knew there was something because there were so many synchronicities around my activity that seemed to be leading me down a certain path. So I felt like there was something guiding me, and there certainly was something guiding me, but it wasn't from God, obviously. Um, so I had been urged by spirit to start meditating, probably a couple years before this was going on. And when I tried to, I immediately felt a presence standing next to me. And I would open my eyes and nothing would be there, but I felt it. When I closed my eyes, I knew something was observing me. So I stopped meditating. And then by this time, where I'm pretty well convinced that I'm going off into the esoteric as my spirituality. Um, Urging to meditate was very strong, and I felt like I even heard something said to me. What did it say? Something about the urgency of self-discovery. And I felt like it was my duty to follow that urging and to start meditating. Um, because in the New Age, we really tend to conflate our personal spirituality with enlightening the world and helping the world, helping humanity. And there was that feeling there. So I started meditating regularly. Um, I eventually worked up to an hour a day at least, and became more or less addicted to meditation. And that was increasing my sensitivity, to hear and to see and to feel people's emotions and to know what they were thinking, having really interesting weird dreams that seemed to mean something, just sort of these sort of spiritual awakening experiences that a lot of people have. And it was around this time that I was looking on my Kindle app, and recommended in my carousel of recommended books was a Dolores Cannon book called Convoluted Universe.
Well, that is it for this week, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you, as always, for sharing this podcast with a friend, for rating and reviewing us and subscribing and donating to the podcast if you feel so led. I'm really looking forward to sharing next week's episode with you. It covers a topic we haven't really covered much yet on Spirit Answers Podcast, part of the New Age that we haven't covered much. I think we touched on it just a little bit in one of the previous episodes. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. And I want to remind you, too, to please submit your prayer requests either in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, to my email directly at spiritanswerspodcast@gmail.com, the same place you can submit your testimony to be on the show. Or we always love prayer requests in the Facebook group Spirit Answers as well. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. As always, I will be praying for you here this week, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great week, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.